The name's Brosnan. Pierce Brosnan. Hey everybody, my name is Brandon, aka the BrandoCritic, and welcome back to another James Bond 007 ranking tier list video. We've done Sean Connery, we've done Roger Moore, and I've done individual reviews for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Living Daylights, and License to Kill. Now it's Bond of the 90s with Pierce Brosnan. But before this tier list actually starts, one of my high school teachers told me that the first Bond that you witness will be your Bond. If that means whoever was James Bond when you became a James Bond fan will be your Bond, then it's Daniel Craig. But my first Bond movie I ever saw was Die Another Day. Looking back now, that was probably the worst Bond movie to see as my first one. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's get down to the tier list. So here we got the tier list, and this one's going to be a bit shorter than the other episodes, only because we only have 4 James Bond movies, and we'll be starting with Goldeneye. You know, the one that started this video game, and it's a really great movie. So I'm going to put that one in really like it, because this is a really great movie. And after watching them all in a row, and then after watching License to Kill, Goldeneye just seems like a giant boost of youthful energy, right? As soon as the gun barrel starts and you hear that Eric Serra score and how experimental it is, you just know that this is a new James Bond for a new generation in a new time period. And it has that spunk. You know, Tina Turner's song is really catchy. And of course, you have Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. He's not as badass as Dalton, and he's not as suave as Roger Moore, but he's a good mix of both. And he looks like James Bond. Pierce Brosnan is a good looking dude. And you gotta love that when he introduces himself as Bond, James Bond, the music stops. He is just one badass guy. He has that swagger that James Bond is always known for, but he also brings that human element too, which they try to bring out a couple times in the movies, but it would take until Daniel Craig to really hone down on the human side of James Bond, really effectively at least. But this film has everything you'd want in a Bond movie, right? You got a badass, sexy henchwoman, Xenia Zergevnya on a top, played by Famke Janssen, and you know what? Thinking about it now, Pierce Brosnan had a lot of femme fatales, right? 3 of his 4 movies has a villain played by a woman. Interesting thought. But to contrast her, you got the computer programmer Natalia Simonova, and you know what? She's badass, but she's actually central to the plot, and she's actually a lot more fleshed out than a lot of the Bond girls we have had in previous entries. But you go down the entire list of this movie, and every single element feels like it just brings that new energy, that new refreshing energy, whether that be Samantha Bond's Moneypenny, or you have Judi Dench as M, and then you have Alec Trevelyan, 006 as a main villain, and he's great because he knows James Bond personally, and he's very close to him in terms of skill, right? He knows all the 00 tactics that James Bond uses. The action is great. It's an intriguing story. Goldeneye is one of the best James Bond movies out there, and yes, it is the best Pierce Brosnan James Bond, because Tomorrow Never Dies, it did not live up to Goldeneye, but I did like it, so I will put it in like it. Now, Tomorrow Never Dies came out in 1997, and knowing that, Tomorrow Never Dies just feels like a very generic but adequate 90s action movie, because that is the best part of this movie, the action sequences, right? You have the pre-title sequence with the jet plane, you know, you have the remote controlled BMW chase, and then you have the foot chase and the motorcycle chase with Wei Lin. All that stuff is really, really great. Of course, Pierce Brosnan is great as always. Wei Lin is probably the most badass Bond girl we've ever had. And Elliot Carver, he's an interesting villain because he wants world domination, but through mass media. Something that is probably more relevant today than back in 1997. And Jonathan Pryce does give a really great performance. So you have all the elements that make up a great Bond movie. But in my eyes, just similar to For Your Eyes Only, it has everything that you'd need, but it feels less than the sum of its parts, right? As a whole, you're like, yeah, that's good. Because I just feel like some of the ideas just weren't really fleshed out enough. They weren't fully utilized to their full potential, which will be a theme in the next movie, but we'll get to that in a second. You know, we have James Bond's ex-girlfriend as Carver's actual wife in this movie, and then you have Carver's just huge power using media, and we only really get to see that used once. And the entire backstory of that whole segment, it doesn't feel particularly strong. If that was much, much stronger, then I feel like this movie would have really worked. Again, like The World Is Not Enough, which I will talk about soon, you know, Tomorrow Never Dies, it just feels like missed potential. And plus, the cinematography and the title song are just very generic, very bland. You know, there's a lot of grays in this movie. It doesn't really look visually stunning. You know, Goldeneye had kind of like that that visual flair. You know, it had like spunk, it had a voice, it had energy. Whereas Tomorrow Never Dies, it has the explosions and it has the action, but it doesn't have that very unique voice. When looking at Tomorrow Never Dies in terms of the entire James Bond franchise, it kind of gets lost by the wayside. It's a perfectly adequate movie and an enjoyable watch, but not as memorable or great as Goldeneye. Next, we have The World Is Not Enough, released in 1999, and you know what? This movie is frustrating. This movie is frustrating because when I look at it, I see the potential for a great James Bond movie. But then on the other hand, I see elements in the movie and the lack of utilization of some of the ideas that they bring forward, and I'm like, you guys were so close, and then you added in more crap. So, on one hand, I really enjoy this movie. And then on another hand, there's some parts of this movie I just can't stand. Like, what were you thinking, Denise Richards? I will talk about her in a minute. But I will go right in the middle and say that I actually do like The World Is Not Enough. Let's put it over there. I do like this movie. You know, there are some things that are brought forward in this movie, and you can go, there's a great movie in here. And that is Elektra King. What a great idea for a Bond girl and a Bond villain. Right? Having the main Bond girl betray James Bond and him actually feeling like, I cannot believe this. Like the ending when, you know, spoilers, but when James Bond shoots Elektra in cold blood, that is some of the best James Bond that Pierce Brosnan has ever participated in. It's great. Just the movie, it fails to really pump up and live up to that potential. Pump up the potential? You know what I mean. It fails to really give it that energy. Kind of like Goldeneye, where it just had this youthful energy throughout the entire thing. Tomorrow Never Dies is just full of action, while the story doesn't really feel utilized. In this one, the story, you can tell that like they really put the story first, and they wanted to put the twists and turns and make it feel like a more, you know, close to heart James Bond film. But the action sequences are not very memorable. They're pretty lackluster. Yes, the opening boat chase down the River Thames, that's great. The best action sequence in the movie, but it's right at the beginning, before even the title sequence. And by the way, the title sequence by Garbage, The World Is Not Enough, is actually pretty good. One of my favorites in the Pierce Brosnan era. It's not as good as Tina Turner, but I do enjoy it more than Sheryl Crow's and Madonna's. We will talk about that in a minute. But yes, Elektra King. Everything that they did with Elektra King, I really enjoyed, and I really did see what they were trying to go for. Except it doesn't really live up to those giant standards that we have with the Sean Connery movies, and it doesn't feel that personal because we have, you know, Denise Richards in the movie. Man, is she distracting. And man, she is just terrible. Denise Richards can give a good performance if you cast her in a role that warrants it, right? Like Starship Troopers. Like, she was cast perfectly in that movie because that's what Paul Verhoeven was going for. This, oh my goodness. Just that climax. Like, I could have acted better than that. I'm not going to go for a wet t-shirt look, but you get the picture. You know, the locations are pretty drab. Again, like Tomorrow Never Dies, this isn't a very visually pleasing movie, right? James Bond doesn't go to all, like, the best locations in the world. All the action scenes are pretty lackluster, especially with the helicopter with the chainsaws down there. You can just tell that it was in a film studio on some docks, right? And again, the ski chase, it's decent. But it fails to really bring us that energy, and again, you have this great action sequence in the beginning of the movie, and everything else just fails to live up to it. But then again, halfway through the movie, when the filmmakers were going, okay, this is the twist, all right, here's the story we wanted to tell with Elektra King being the true villain. And I'm like, okay, like, where was this the whole movie? I'm feeling tension, I'm feeling intrigue, I'm actually getting really emotionally invested. And then Denise Richards shows up again. It's like, okay, I'm watching a 1990s James Bond movie. Then we're starting to see some CGI used for the first time. Die Another Day is a whole other story. But again, this is a frustrating film. It's a frustrating film because I know that there's a great film in here which got lost along the way. Like one of the main villains, Bernard, he's almost immune to pain, right? He's got a bullet in his head. And they don't really write anything really clever for it. That's a great premise for a Bond villain, right? He can't feel any pain and he's getting stronger and stronger by the second. But he's not really utilized very much. They don't write anything very clever for the whole no pain thing. So all in all, I did enjoy my time with The World Is Not Enough. It's not a terrible movie, but Denise Richards, man. My God. And then we get to Die Another Day, released in 2002, and yeah, this one is just not for me. This was the very first James Bond movie I ever saw. My neighborhood, they have these garage sales, and I must have been pretty young. This movie came out when I was 7, and I got it on VHS, and I'm like, I'm gonna watch a James Bond movie, Mom. And I watched Die Another Day, of course, me being 7 years old, and then him sleeping with Halle Berry and Miranda Frost, or Rosamund Pike, I guess. I was like, wow, this is the most awesome thing in the world, James Bond with these cool cars. Little did I know that this was the worst James Bond movie. I mean, it's pretty universally known or agreed upon that this is the worst one, and I kind of agree with it. But it started off really promising. You know, when watching it again, I'm like, maybe this movie isn't so bad after all. Maybe I'm just, buying into the whole, internet noise, because I really like how this film starts off. Him being captured in North Korea, there's a mole inside MI6 that betrayed him, and the whole hovercraft chase. I'm like, you know what, this isn't terrible. Like, this could be a great movie. Like Diamonds Are Forever, this film is just full of crap. It's full of just fucking shit. Like, some of the choices are like, why? But, I mean, here's a list. Okay, you have a song that doesn't work, right? I don't mind Madonna's song, Die Another Day. I really don't. But in the context of a James Bond movie, and the fact that she cameos in it is just weird. It's just odd. I like the fact that he was captured. And I like the fact that in the pre-title sequence, you have, the girls were like really hot and cold, and they're kind of like, touching Bond and like that kind of stuff. I like that. But the song just, ugh. It's that early 2000s techno pop beat. We have extremely clunky dialogue. We have Halle Berry giving a pretty bad performance, at least in my eyes. Then we got Miranda Frost's reveal, which we had a reveal just like that in the previous movie, but that one felt warranted. It felt like it was actually, building up to it, where this one just kind of came out of nowhere, and it didn't really feel warranted or earned, and there should be some tension there. It's like, oh my god, she's the bad guy. I didn't meet her at the beginning of the movie. The film wasn't really about her. I feel like they just tried to do the exact same thing as World Is Not Enough, but that film actually did it better. Then we got underwhelming villains like Graves, like, being Colonel Moon in disguise, or with the gene therapy thing. It's just weird. But then again, James Bond had cloning in the past, so I guess it fits, but I don't know. It's just weird. And you got the plot that makes no sense, right? So he's has gene therapy, but then he becomes this huge star with this ice palace, and he gets like this zero to hero, rags to riches lifestyle in 14 months, because that's as long as James Bond was in North Korea being captured, or being, he was held prisoner. So all that happened in 14 months. Again, it's just weird. You got some crazy ice palace in Iceland. Then you got an invisible car, right? Gadgets are cool and everything, but an invisible car? Like, now we're getting like into some sci-fi stuff, because, Graves has that RoboCop suit. We know he can electrocute people. And then CGI. And, oh my goodness. My god, does the CGI not hold up whatsoever. It's distracting. The James Bond series of films have always, taken inspiration of what is popular at that time, right? Blaxploitation films with Live and Let Die, Star Wars with Moonraker, so on and so forth, License to Kill, Miami Vice. This movie feels like it saw Fast and the Furious and Mission Impossible 2 and said, we need to put James Bond in a movie like that, with its fast editing, it's like poppy, Madonna-filled score. It doesn't feel James Bond. It feels James Bond, it's got to be cool and edgy. This is 2002, motherfucker. We got CGI. We got these giant tidal waves. It just looks stupid. I will say, though, the sword fight in this movie is really good. Really good. Thumbs up. The surfing scene at the beginning, it's short, but that's impressive because it's real. And the Aston Martin and Jaguar chase in Iceland is still pretty great. I've actually seen those actual cars in real life. That was really cool to see, but just, oh my goodness. The worst part is, though, I can nitpick about the CGI and about the performances and things like that, but the main problem with this movie is that it doesn't feel exciting. It doesn't feel like a James Bond movie. It doesn't have that energy. Like, you just feel bored while watching it, because you're like, this is just stupid. And it's not so bad that it's great. It's not like, oh my god, can you see how terrible this is? Let's watch Die Another Day. It's depressing. Especially knowing that this was Pierce Brosnan's last movie. And it was a shame, because I feel like his tenure should have been better. Roger Moore had some bad movies as well, but he also had The Spy Who Loved Me. He had Live and Let Die. Even For Your Eyes Only, some people will still say that that's the best one out of his era. It's all opinion based, but still, his era had some bad movies, but he had some great movies also. I feel like Pierce Brosnan got the short end of the stick, and I think he knows that too, because I've heard him in some interviews saying, you know, I wish that some of our films went in this direction, not this direction, and it's just a shame, because I think that Pierce Brosnan did a pretty good job as James Bond, and he did give some great performances, especially with Electra King in The World Is Not Enough. I was like, man, you had it. You had it, and you blew it. Still an enjoyable movie, but it could have been great. Same with Tomorrow Never Dies. I really think that one could have been great too. If it just, you know, there's like that missing piece. And Die Another Day was just a lost, you know, it started off promising and then it just off. So Pierce Brosnan's era of James Bond, most people will just remember Goldeneye. So anyways, guys, tell me down in the comment section down below, what is your ranking of the James Bond films for Pierce Brosnan's era? Obviously, I'd have Goldeneye at number 1. And then for number 2, you know what? I'll put Tomorrow Never Dies ahead of The World Is Not Enough because it has less baffling choices. While I think The World Is Not Enough had some better story elements, Tomorrow Never Dies did have the better action. It did have the more James Bondian feel with the gadgets and the fun action sequences and the over-the-top villains. And Die Another Day is obviously at the bottom. And I think, as of right now, it is my least favorite James Bond film. Worse than Diamonds Are Forever and worse than A View to a Kill. Again, who knows what I'll think when I watch Quantum of Solace and Spectre again, although I remember really liking Spectre, so we shall see. Anyways, guys, whatever the answer is, let me know down in the comment section down below. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos just like this, definitely hit like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Take care.